This is section 116, and we're going to examine distance on the coordinate plane. And so in this lesson, we're going to calculate the distance between 2 points and find the midpoint of a line segment. So an important concept of geometry is the notion of length. If we are to unite algebra and geometry using the Cartesian plane, we need to understand the concept of distance. And so our goal is to create an algebraic formula to compute the distance between these 2 points. So consider the situation below. I know it says above, but consider the situation below. We have 2 points, point P and point Q, and I want to imagine it as a right triangle. So I draw this new point here, and it's going to have this same x value, which is why it's going to be x1, and it's going to have this same y value, which is why it's going to have y sub 0 or y naught. That's the way we do it. We think of that as x sub 0 or y sub 0, or we say y naught or x naught. Now, if I have a right triangle now, we can use the Pythagorean theorem. Yay! A squared plus b squared equals c squared. So, if this is a, b, and c, that means that to find a, I'm going to take this value and subtract it from this value. That's how to find the distance between any straight distance, is you just subtract them. And then to find the distance between these, for b, I just subtract the y sub 1 and y sub 0. And so that's my a, that's my b, and my c equals d. So we're just going to plug it into the formula. So a, we said, was x sub 1 minus x sub 0, and then squared, plus b, we said equaled y sub 1 minus y sub 0, squared, and then instead of c, it's d, the distance, so I get d squared. And then we square root both sides, and then we have our distance formula. This is something we need to know. So, having derived it, the distance formula, the distance d between the points x sub 0 and y sub 0, or x naught, y naught, and the second point, x1, y1, is going to be this formula here. It needs to be memorized. We need to be able to find the distance between 2 points on a coordinate plane. So let's look at an example here. So I drew it out. I'm labeling it. We have our x sub 0 and y sub 0. We have our x1 and our y1. The easiest way to think about it is just to start with the formula. So if we have it memorized and we start with the formula, the next step is just plugging in the values. So I said x sub 1 is 1, so I plugged in 1. Minus x naught, or x sub 0, is negative 2, so I plugged in negative 2. y1, and then y0. You just plug them in. The rest is algebra. 1 minus negative 2 is 3. Negative 3 minus 3 is negative 6. They're both squared. 3 squared is 9. 6 squared is 36. I get the square root of 45. And now simplifying a square root, remember we want to break that up into perfect squares. So the square root of 9 and the square root of 5. And then once they're broken up into perfect squares, you can simplify it. What's the square root of 9? That's 3. So it's 3 square root 5. Now what happens if we're a little bit more abstract? Right? Because in this previous example, I'm asking you to find what the distance is, but what if I give you the distance? And I'm asking you to find all the points with the x-coordinate of 1, which is 4 units from this point 3, 2. Now what that means is I'm missing the y value. I have the x value, I'm missing the y value. So in visualizing it, I have this point 3, 2, and I have this imaginary line because I know the x-coordinate has to be 1, and it's going to be some value on that line that gives me the distance of 4. And so 3, 2 is 1 point, but 1 y is my second point. I don't know what my y value is. I know the distance is going to be 4. So if this is my formula, right, we're starting with the formula, I don't know what this is. That's what I am looking for, and we're going to use math to then find it. So my distance is 4, and then I plug in the rest of the values. My x1 is 1, my x0 is 3, my y is my y1, and then my y0 is my 2. From there, we just use algebra to simplify it. How do I get rid of a square root? I square both sides. Now, 1 minus 3 is negative 2. Negative 2 squared is 4. Now I can subtract 4. Now how do I get rid of a square? You square root both sides. And so you get plus or minus. Now I have to simplify the square root of 12. Remember, to simplify a square root, you break it up into perfect squares. So square root of 12, a perfect square that goes into it is 4. So that's square root of 4 times square root of 3. Square root of 4 is 2. So that's going to be 2 root 3. So you get plus or minus 2 root 3. Well, is y by itself? No. So I'm going to add 2 to both sides, and I'm going to get y equals 2 plus or minus 2 root 3. Now remember, what did the question ask? I found the y value, but the question asked, find all the points with the x-coordinate 1. All the points. I needed to find the points. I found the y value, but I need to state what those points are. So my 2 points, my x value is 1, and then I did 2 plus 2 root 3 for the one y value, and 2 minus root 3 for the second y value. Now the next piece is going to be able to find the midpoint. So given the same 2 points, so we're defining x0, y0, x1, y1 on the plane, the midpoint, M, between those 2 points is going to be defined to be the point on the line segment that's connecting them, whose distance from P is equal to the distance from Q. So that means that this distance is the same as that distance. So here's our second equation that we need to memorize. The midpoint M of the line segment connecting point P and point Q is you add the 2 x values together and divide by 2. You add the 2 y values and divide by 2. That creates your midpoint. So it's a new x value, it's a new y value, and those are your midpoints. So let's be able to do this. Let's look at an example of this. So it says find the midpoint of the line segment connecting point P and point Q. So here's our substitution if we're thinking it in the definition. So our definition of a midpoint, you add the 2 x values, divide by 2, add the 2 y values, divide by 2. So plugging in the 2 x values, x0 is negative 2, x1 is 1, y0 is 3, y1 is negative 3, negative 2 plus 1 is negative 1, so you get negative 1/2. 3 plus negative 3 is 0, 0 over 2 is 0, and so the midpoint of the segment PQ is going to be negative 1/2 and 0. Now, you could have just stopped there, and that you could state that that's what your midpoint is. No big deal, but I just wrote a sentence to kind of explain it. So what did we learn today? We talked about how to find the distance and the midpoint between 2 points. So what was the distance formula? So that was the distance formula that we went over. Sometimes we think it as x2 minus x1. That's okay as well. I know maybe we memorized it that way. That's fine. It's the same thing. I just started at 0 and instead of starting at 1. And then what was the midpoint formula? So the midpoint is a new point in which you're adding the 2 x values together and you're adding the 2 y values together, and you've created your new point. This does conclude our lesson. If you have any other questions, please leave them in the comments.